As we continue on Sports Guys Talking Wrestling on the Horn 104.9 AM 1260, WWE reintroduced Starrcade here in recent days, and got me to thinking. If you've listened to this show for any amount of time, my absolute love for everything that was the National Wrestling Alliance, Jim Crockett Promotions. I was a huge fan, of course, of the first Starrcades way back in the day, the Flair for the Gold, and all the different cards that the NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions would put on. Of course, I was always in front of the TV Saturday nights, 5:05 p.m. in Texas, but 6:05 in Atlanta. There on Channel 17, the superstation there. And one of the gentlemen that was a huge part and a huge icon in that moment and is an absolute legend joins us now on the Vaqueros Cafe and Cantina hotline. He is a former NWA United States Heavyweight Champion, former World Television Champion, former multiple-time World Tag Team Champion, and six-man Tag Team Champion. We've had Cody Rhodes, the American Nightmare. Well, it's my pleasure to bring on the Russian Nightmare. Nikita Koloff, how are you, sir?
Hey, it's great to be with you, man. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. I don't know if you remember, but you and I met in Orlando back in April, and I joked with you that back in the day, so I was in the United States Army, and I was a Russian translator. And, in fact, I got to see you live in Honolulu, Hawaii back in 1988. And you were in the main event. It was you and Ric Flair for the world title. And I was desperate to meet you after the show, and I wanted to try out my Russian with you. Of course, I had no idea back then that you were actually from Minnesota. So, so whatever you did...
You probably speak way more Russian than me.
Whatever you did, you had me convinced that I was Russian. So kudos to you. Let's talk about that. You came out of that Robbinsdale, Minnesota area that spawned so many legends. You were trained by Eddie Sharkey. It seems like the bulk of the greats in wrestling either came from Robbinsdale, Minnesota, or West Texas A&M. Why those two are paired, I'll never know.
Yeah.
What? Give me a couple memories of learning how to wrestle under Eddie Sharkey, and a couple of those I guess lessons that really stuck with you.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, and I've had this discussion a number of times. So now is the time to set the record straight. I was never trained by Eddie Sharkey. I don't know how that got out there.
Really? Okay.
I don't know why.
I guess because you were from Minnesota.
I guess they just kind of clump us all together because Rick Rude and Barry Darsow and Road Warrior Animal and those guys did. And I guess because I was friends with them, people automatically assumed. Or Eddie's out there telling people he trained me. I don't know. But here's the real story. You want the real story?
Yes. So who trained you?
Well, nobody. That's the real story.
Okay.
So what happened, in a nutshell, give you the condensed version, what happened was I was training, graduated college, training for a pro football tryout. I had actually recruited Road Warrior Animal to college to play football with me, and we did for a couple of years. And then he went on to go into wrestling, and I finished out my football career in college. I was scouted by the NFL. I was training for a pro football tryout when I graduated college, and I got a random call from Animal one day. He said, "Hey, what do you think about wrestling?" And I go, "I think you're doing great." No, he goes, "No, what do you think about?" I go, "You mean like me wrestle?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, Don Kernodle, who was one half of the World Tag Team Champions in the NWA with Ivan Koloff, he and Sergeant Slaughter came up with this whole entire storyline of a nephew for Ivan, centered around the '84 Olympics and the boycott of the LA Games and yada, yada, yada. The entire storyline. And they approached Animal, and Don asked him this question, Stu: do you know any big guys who wouldn't mind shaving their head and becoming a Russian? And Animal, without hesitation, said, I know the guy right now. He goes, let me call him. So he called me. He told me the storyline. And I said, Joe, I go, do they know that I have no amateur wrestling background and 0 professional training? He said, yeah, I told them that. I go, okay, and they don't care. He goes, no, they said they didn't care. I go, well, what would I have to do? He goes, call this promoter in Charlotte. His name's Jim Crockett. Here's his number. So I did, Stu. I had a 5-minute conversation with Jim Crockett over the phone, sight unseen. He had never seen me. And I said, now, Mr. Crockett, you do understand before I load up my car, come to a town I've never been to before, that I have no amateur background in wrestling, no professional training. I've never hit a ring rope. He goes, yep. I go, okay. He goes, he said this to me, Stu. He goes, be in my office with your head shaved on June 4th. Okay. So I called Hannibal back, told him what he said. Hannibal goes, oh, that's awesome. Swing through Atlanta. I'll have a pair of wrestling boots and some tights for you. I did that. I showed up the day Crockett said to be there in Charlotte, North Carolina. He took one look at me, walked out. He said, wait here. Walked out, walked back in with 2 guys. He goes, Ivan Koloff, Don Canolo, take a look at your new partner. And Nikita Koloff was birthed that day in the hallway. They literally put me right on interviews for about 5 or 6 hours, said, you speak no English, stand there, take your shirt off, look mean. I go, I think I can do that. And Stu, when we finished, the rest of that story, when we finished, Jim Crockett said, be in Raleigh, North Carolina tomorrow night, you're going to wrestle on television. I had never been in a ring.
Really?
We got to town. Yes, sir. We got to town. This is the actual story. We got to town late. We wasn't happy. Not my fault. We got there late. In the dressing room, they showed me a couple basic things, how to tie up and do that, and then said, do this, and you'll get your hand raised. And the only instruction Uncle Ivan gave me was, don't trip on the ropes getting in the ring, or Jim Crockett said, you're out of here, your history. So I said, I think I can handle that one. Went to the ring. 11 seconds later, in front of a sold-out crowd on television, I had my first win in professional wrestling, and that's the actual story.
Wow. Do you remember who you faced in that first match?
Well, at the time, he wrestled as Bret Hart, later to become known as Barry Horowitz.
Okay.
And he was my first opponent, 11 seconds. And so one might ask, for the listening audience out there, well, then what'd you do from that? How'd you get trained? What'd you do? What we did for the next 2-3 months is Ivan, Don, and I would drive to the towns early, 2-3 hours early. Those guys would get in the ring and bump all over the ring and teach me the mechanics of wrestling. I'd have a single match. Ivan would sit in my corner. They'd have a world tag team match. I would sit in their corner. And on the drive home every night, we talked then about the psychology of wrestling. And that's how I learned the art of professional wrestling, Stu.
That is incredible. So basically it was on-the-job training, in other words.
On-the-job training. I don't honestly know another story like that anywhere ever, to my knowledge, in the history of wrestling. Don't know that could ever be repeated again today. I don't know the WWE would even consider doing that without at least training the guy.
No,
but that's the actual story. Yeah, it's crazy. Whenever I just saw Don Canolo last weekend. Basically, every time I see him, he will say, he'll bring it up. He'll go, I still can't believe we just threw you into the ring like that. He goes, but you did it. You pulled it off, you know?
Well, and you're right. That would never be done. I mean, we've seen guys they have wrestled, on the independent scene and in other organizations, and they'll get to the performance center and still spend, 3, 4, 5 months in the performance center before they even see a WWE ring. So I can understand
right.
that. We're talking with Nikita Koloff. So what was those first year or two, because you're in there as the brute Soviet superpower. You're menacing. I remember the Chatoata all the time. You said that. That was always in the promo. And with Ivan Koloff, those first couple years had to have been your head had to have been kind of swimming for a little bit, right?
Well, the first year. I mean, think about it. So for those who just heard my story, so within months, I am. I'm wrestling, basically single matches or sometimes even handicap matches. They put me a lot of times between two guys, and I'd beat up both guys in like 2 minutes and pin them both at the same time and hang with my Russian chain and over the rope and after the bell and just built more and more and more heat. And then it was in Conway, South Carolina, just months into the business. I got my first opportunity to wrestle main event against the Rock and Roll Express with Kernodle, with Don. I think it was Don. Don or I? No, it was Ivan. Don was hurt, and so I stepped in, and then within a couple more months, I'm wrestling Raging Bull and Manny Fernandez and Dusty Rhodes in the main event. I'm wrestling Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I'm wrestling legendary Johnny Weaver here in the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, Rufus R. Freight Train Jones. Now I'm in the ring with all these marquee name guys. And before you know it, within months, I'm the World Tag Team Champion. I'm the World Six-Man Champion. And to the day, 13 months to the day, I'm wrestling in the first ever Great American Bash against the Nature Boy Ric Flair for the World Heavyweight title. Only 13 months into the business. It was insane.
That is crazy. Let me ask you, what was it like to work for Jim Crockett and to be around? I mean, was there any sense about what you guys were establishing? Was it just a matter of this is the way it was going to be, and you're gonna plow through, and you're hitting all these towns? What was it like being in Jim Crockett Promotions in the Mid-Atlantic in those days?
Well, I guess looking back now, when you're in the midst of it, it's your job, right? You go from town to town basically every night. I mean, people, it's such a different business nowadays. I mean, it really blows people when they're like, oh yeah, would you wrestle like a couple nights a week or something? I'm like, yeah. 1986, I had 454 matches that one year. Okay.
Crazy.
Now, for those who are good at math, right away they can figure, well, there's only 365 days in a year. How'd you pull that one off? Well, you brought back a memory when you said Channel 17, Superstation, WTBS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we would do 3 hours of television taping every Saturday morning. We had to be down at that studio by 8 a.m., taping 3 hours of television. And then we would typically rush off to an afternoon matinee match, maybe come back to the Omni for a match that night in Atlanta, maybe go to Asheville, North Carolina on Sunday afternoon for a match, and finish in Charlotte, North Carolina, Sunday night for a match. So it was conceivable to have, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 matches over the course of 2 days when you add in the television taping. And that was just for the Superstation. Then we also taped 2 hours of local television, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling every single week. So it was possible to have two matches and maybe even a dark match that night and have 3 matches in one day. So that's how I totaled up 454 matches in that one year. But looking back to really address your question, look around I think about the Mid-South with Bill Watts, the territory out in Texas, World Championship with the Von Erichs and Don Owens up in Portland, and these different territories, Vern Gagne with the AWA, et cetera, et cetera. Wow, I guess I didn't really realize at the time just what we were a part of. I'm more appreciative of it now, Stu, because like last Saturday, I did a big Legends autograph signing in Winston-Salem, North Carolina at WrestleCade. And to hear the stories from the fans, that's what I enjoy more than anything now when I go out on these autograph signings, is the stories from the fans, that their flashback of memories and what they share and how they call over and over and over again. I hear the golden era of wrestling. So I feel so blessed to really have been a part of that era and a part of Jim Crockett Promotions.
Let me ask you this, Nikita. You mentioned about that. You worked so well with Dusty Rhodes. You were, not only as an antagonist, but then teaming up with him. And there's stories abound about what Dusty meant to professional wrestling, what he meant to the people that were around him. Let me ask you this: what was a great lesson that you didn't expect to get from Dusty?
I think again, so fortunate to be able to run the roads with him for almost a couple of years as the quote superpowers. Just the charisma that he had in the ring, certainly, and in front of a camera. Just being able to watch, and I really tried to become because I had no training in breaking into the business, I tried to become a real student of the business, studying film, watching films, when I had some off time or in between matches, watching the matches themselves, going out and watching, not just sitting in the dressing room until it was match time for me, but going out and watching 2, 3, 4, 5 of the matches prior to my match or after my match. And really just trying to learn. Dusty, nothing but the highest regard. We became really, really good friends through that experience of traveling with him for a couple of years, many times just him and I in the car, and being able to talk about life and just, not just about wrestling, but talk about dreams, and things, after life after wrestling, that sort of thing. And so I feel very fortunate that in working with him as a heel, which you said an antagonist, be able to have that opportunity and then flip that and become his partner, to have the privilege of having experience both those aspects. And I count it a privilege. It was really, you say, what did I learn most, or something I didn't expect? Really just again, as with other guys, just psychology of the business, just being able to watch, study, converse, talk, and learn, because that element of it, I believe anyway, Sue, is gone from the business. I don't know that they'll ever recapture that. Some listeners may not even know what I'm talking about when I talk about the psychology of the business, but he was one of the masters of psychology when it came to booking matches, putting cards together, and then helping a person excel their own individual career. And that's what he did. That's what he helps me do.
Amazing. We're talking with Nikita Koloff, the great legend that wrestled so well back in the days of the NWA and the early days of WCW. Let me ask you this, because as I mentioned, WWE just brought back Starrcade for a house show there in Greensboro, and you wrestled on several of those Starrcade events, from the title defense with you and Ivan against the Rock and Roll Express, several of those. Give me a couple of or maybe one fun story about those big events that you wrestled, whether it was Starrcade or it was Great American Bash with War Games. Give me a couple stories that the listeners would enjoy to hear.
Well, certainly Starrcade was what we called the granddaddy of them all. For us, it was the Super Bowl of wrestling, without a doubt. So quite an honor to be a part of those events, and especially if you're a main event, and 86 had the good fortune to be the main event against the Nature Boy in what was it, the Night of Skywalkers, I guess. And then even 85, we just celebrated just the last few days. We celebrated, 31 years ago, 32 years ago, some of these historical events. Rock and Roll Express helping to build their career by dropping the World Tag Team titles to them. So certainly that event was great to be a part of. You know, you mentioned, as I mentioned, being in the very first ever Great American Bash against the Nature Boy in his first title defense. It was interesting because, you know, that year, you know, I was the heel, and he was the baby face, and then we flipped it, you know, the next year in '86. You know, I came in as, of course, with the accident with Magnum TA, you know, and the turn to becoming a good guy, a baby face. So that was fun to have that. Again, both aspects of that. War Games. You mentioned the War Games. That was probably one of the funnest matches to be in. Again, because of the electricity in the atmosphere in whatever arena we brought that to. Because the fans had no clue, no idea what was going to happen. You know, you flip of the coin, and you know, and every time that bell rang, and they're trying to figure out who's going to go in next, and you know, and it's a 2-on-1 advantage, you know, each time, and so just the back and forth of that match, and the excitement of the fans. You know, I don't know that they ever, you know, sat down, you know, from the opening bell to the final conclusion of the War Games, and so that certainly brings back some really, really fun memories. And then the other thing I'd mention is the best of 7 against Magnum TA. Mm-hmm. If I hear anything out there from the wrestling fans, I mean, I hear all kinds of stories, of course, but probably more often than not, what's brought up is the best of 7, just the creativity of that, the originality of that, again, credited to Dusty Rhodes, and then the chemistry that I felt Magnum and I had with each other really drew, I felt, the fans into that whole scenario of best of 7 culminating with match number 7 in, you know, Charlotte, North Carolina. I had a lot of epic matches in the Queen City of Charlotte, North Carolina, and that being one of them.
Yeah, remembering back, and you know, it's been kind of funny, you know, between bringing back Starrcade, bringing back War Games for NXT, and thinking back, you know, one of my favorite combination for War Games was you with Dusty and the Road Warriors versus the Four Horsemen, and then you brought in, you know, Paul Ellering on your side and JJ Dillon on their side, and it was just so magical just because of the rivalry and the intense just the feeling of both sides, and like you said, that psychology that we don't see as much nowadays. What can you pinpoint as to why that psychology may be missing? Is it a matter of there's so much that is now open about pro wrestling, or is it something else that has let the psychology rather diminish?
Oh, I can easily address that. Let me just say before I do, the interesting thing about that matchup, of course, the War Games being the 5 against 5. One of the unique opportunities we had was that we could create any combination, whether it was a War Games or an 8-man tag or a 6-man tag or a tag or an individual match. Myself, Dusty, Animal, and Hawk, along with, or I should say, opposed to any combination of the Four Horsemen. Again, whether single matches, tag matches, 6-man matches, 8-man tag matches, or culminating with the War Games, any combination of that was such amazing chemistry out in the auditorium with the fans. That brought, I believe, a very unique opportunity to the business of professional wrestling. That the fans just continue to appreciate over and over and over again. That said, to answer your question, to address the question about psychology, it is a lost art because the wrestlers essentially really no longer have to create the match themselves because they have writers, right? So you have writers
Correct.
who write the match, who write up even their interviews, correct?
That's correct.
What some people may not know is the only thing in our day we had was called a booker. The booker would create the lineup of matches, create the card, and hand down the predetermined outcome. But the rest of it was all fell on the shoulders of whoever the wrestlers in the ring were. In other words, from the opening bell leading up to that predetermined outcome was a spontaneous ad lib, if you will, most of the time right in the ring. Very little conversations between the two because in those days, typically you're in separate locker rooms on separate ends of the building. And so you're basically just going to the ring, knowing what the predetermined outcome is, but having to then spontaneously tell a story in the ring that would make sense and lead into the outcome. And that was the art or the psychology of wrestling. And for those who were able to excel and do that, or able to do that well, they excelled into the main event matches. For those who weren't, then they typically stayed, opening, middle card, type of matches. So taking nothing away from the talent and the skills of professional wrestlers of today, but when it comes to actually having to go in and think on your feet in the midst of a match, for the most part, gone. And gone because all the interviews are written, all the matches are written. You basically have to go in there and just kind of walk it through, right? Memorize it and pantomime it and walk it through. And so that's my answer to your question as to why there's why the element of psychology is no longer needed.
And that makes total sense. Having been lucky enough to work with a couple of the independent promotions that are here in Central Texas, I can see a little bit of that where, again, it's kind of like what you guys did back in the day. They know what the match is. They know who's supposed to come out on top, but then to watch them actually work out the match and see what move they're going to use and how they're going to invoke a reaction or an emotion from the crowd. I can see that, and you're right. It seems to be missing because of the abundance of writing, pre-writing the match, like you said, and promos and such as that. We're talking with Nikita Koloff on Sports Guys Talking Wrestling. I want to touch.
Let me interject one more thing.
Yes, sir.
Along that same line. So if you think about it, if I'm going to the ring and it was like a dance, right? Now, anyone who's been involved in a dance, typically knows someone leads, right?
That's correct.
For a good dance, you can't have two leaders. You got one person leading the dance. And so in those days, you'd have one guy, or if it's a tag team, you got the tag team, but basically one guy, whoever the guy is, one guy in the ring who's leading that dance, and the other guy's just following his lead. And you're listening to the crowd, and you are in there dictating to the crowd. The crowd's not dictating to you. You are dictating to the crowd, and as you determine what you want to do in the ring, that's what draws the crowd into the match was your ability to control that match in the ring. And I mean, think about it. If I wrestle, as many times I wrestle Flair, very rarely did I wrestle in less than 30 minutes, and more often it was an average of 45 minutes per match. Okay? 45 minutes. So there was no memorizing what we're going to do. There was all right, I know what the outcome's going to be. Now I was going to go to the ring, and we're going to put on a 45-minute match and go back and forth and make it make sense to lead into that outcome. that was an art. That was an art.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And that's, something else that you don't see very often is matches that go beyond, 20 minutes, back, like you said, back in the day, 30, 45-minute matches with Flair. That was almost
the norm.
It was the norm.
Was the norm.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, who did you enjoy being in the ring with most? Who was your, I guess, favorite rival? The guy that you knew that if you two were in a match together, you were going to just light up the crowd, and you was going to be absolute money.
Gosh, several come to mind. I mean, Magnum TA I already mentioned because of the best of seven, the chemistry that we had with each other. Just the old, the evil, Tommy Russian versus the All-American, look of Magnum TA. Certainly that was a moneymaker and a very easy one. Ivan and I against the Road Warriors is another one that quickly comes to mind. Just the chemistry of, those two, muscled up men and myself. And although Ivan was, a bit smaller, he was still, stout for his size. And so it still made for a great storyline and a great lineup. Certainly Flair. I mean, without a doubt, I would, in one sense, Flair was a night off because, he could, I tell everybody, and many people have said it, he can make a broomstick look good. He made me look good. So I know he has the ability to make anybody look good, regardless of their level of skill. So certainly he was another one. But gosh, there was just, Sting, Lex Luger, Ricky Steamboat. I could go Ravishing Rick Rude. Just all the guys. There was a lot of guys I was in the ring with that as we worked different angles and different storylines, we were able to draw.
It seems like a lot of you guys, no matter what the combination was, there was every match was going to be just tremendous. It told the story. It would, like I said, evoke the emotion. I joke a lot of times. Tully Blanchard lives in the area. He actually comes to a wrestling event that his daughter wrestles in, Tessa, and he'll show up there. And the first couple times I saw him, I always joke about him that I hated you for trying to stab Magnum TA in the eye with that wooden chair. And it was, but right. A lot of you guys, it was the same thing. It was just you guys just knew exactly which gear to turn and which move to make that would just get that crowd going. And it was an amazing time. I want to ask you this. So let's talk about later in your career, kind of the end of Jim Crockett Promotions, the beginning of WCW. You were going through some personal challenges in your life, and I know you had taken a couple of breaks there. What was the biggest? I guess the biggest thing that you realized during that challenging time, and how did that lead you into your life after wrestling?
It was an eye opener to understand that life is very fragile. Up to that time, I broke into wrestling. I was 285 pounds, 34-inch waist, 8% body fat. I'm working out 2 hours a day, even every day, even the days. Even while I'm in wrestling, we're crushing the gym every single day. We're in a routine. We're traveling to a town. We're in the gym. We're working out. We're in the ring. We're working out. We're wrestling. We're eating. And we're on that grind, day after day. But as big and bulked as I was back then, to see Mandy, to see my wife, battling cancer at the age of 24 and, battling that for 2 years, going through chemo and radiation and experiencing that firsthand, seeing just how destructive that those chemicals and that poison can be. Those are memories forever emblazoned in my mind, and as I watched her literally go through those treatments, the loss of hair, I mean, from a full head of beautiful hair to being bald, ironically, and losing weight and vomiting, getting sick, every time she had to take the chemotherapy. And so to experience all that firsthand and to know at a certain point that even though I was, at the top of considered one of the marquee names, at the time, one of the biggest draws, for the NWA, Jim Crockett, WCW, it still dawned on me that I have to have my priorities in order, and to take care of her was more of a priority than a paycheck and a lofty career in professional wrestling. Now, I have to say, for the record, they were not happy when I notified them that I was going to take a sabbatical. I told them I'd be back, but honestly, it sounds as horrible as it maybe sounds. They were not happy by that. I mean, they didn't necessarily come out and say that, but I could sense and see that. And of course, I eventually did come back, and it was never the same. When I came back, their attitude, by they, I mean the home office, the
Mm-hmm.
Turner organization, they never really treated me the same after that. And I say that to say, no sour grapes or nothing, but I'm just giving you an observation. It was obvious that they were not pleased that I walked away, even though I have a wife that's dying before my eyes.
Right. Let me ask you this: was at that time, or even before, was there ever an offer to go to WWE? Did Vince McMahon ever extend you an offer, or was there any temptation to go there, or what? Were you happy in WCW, NWA?
Great question. The first answer is no. Vince McMahon never offered me an opportunity. I met him in the gym. We had one conversation in Las Vegas, Nevada. We were both, a lot of times we were in the same town on, same night. He'd be over at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. We'd be at the Civic Center in Philadelphia, running head to head. We'd have 10,000 in Civic Center. He'd have 10,000 at the Spectrum, and et cetera. And so we ran into each other at the gym in Las Vegas and had a brief conversation with each other. The only time I was really, if you want to say, approached for WWF was our partner who wrestled as Crusher Khrushchev, Barry Darsow. We had brought him in from Louisiana. He'd been wrestling with Nikolai Volkov down there, and he came to me and he said, "Hey, I'm gonna leave WCW, and go to New York, and I'm gonna got this gimmick, Demolition." And when he told me about it, two things came to mind. One, as we've already alluded to, as hard as I worked on building and protecting the character of Nikita Koloff, I didn't really want to go to another promotion and, in a sense, start all over again, building a new character. But probably more important than that to me was I felt like it was kind of a spin-off of the Road Warriors, and obviously out of respect to Road Warrior Animal, who made that phone call and really opened the door of opportunity for me to have a break in wrestling. I felt a certain loyalty to Animal to not want to do that. And last but not least, I really, more than anything, felt a loyalty to Jim Crockett Promotions. Because Jim was the one look, he took a chance. I mean, like we just told the story, right? Mm-hmm. No training, no background. He puts me in the ring on television with no background in wrestling. That's taking a chance. Now, obviously, he could have covered it up and edited it out if I had flopped and messed it up, but he gave me the chance. The point is, he opened the door and gave me the chance. Could I have negotiated, especially when we started doing contracts, could I have negotiated probably 2-3 times the income with Crockett and or or go to New York and make 4 or 5 times the amount of money? Yep, probably. Now, we'll never know for sure because I didn't make that decision. But all that to say, Stu, I'm loyal to a fault sometimes. I am one of the, I'm still a Minnesota Viking fan, okay? And I hadn't lived in Minnesota since 1984, but I'm still a Minnesota Viking fan. I'm a Minnesota Twins fan, right?
Right.
So out of my heart of loyalty to Jim Crockett Promotions for the break, I really, in essence, was willing to, make less, I guess you'd say, and just remain loyal to him for giving me the opportunity that he did.
That's a great story. And by the way, I'm glad you're not the only one. With all due respect to Axe and Smash, yes, that was an imitation of the Road Warriors, because I'll be a Road Warriors fan till the day I die. So I'm there with you. And I liked and Darso and Needle did a great job.
Barry and I went to school together. I mean, I love Barry. Saw him last weekend at WrestleCade, and and Bill Eadie, great guy, and certainly, as you said, no disrespect to them, and for the character of Demolition, yeah, just something I just couldn't be a part of. So.
I understand. Talking with Nikita Koloff. So, you stepped away from wrestling around 92, 93, and I know you'd gotten into the ministry. I think you're still in the ministry. Tell folks about what you've been doing since you left the ring.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been a fascinating story for me. Well, the whole life story. In fact, we wrote a book about it recently called Nikita, A Tale of the Ring and Redemption. Probably available on Amazon and other places. But, I'm just covering my life story from as far back as I can remember, those early days in Moscow, Minnesota. And I'm kidding to listen.
I like
There's
that.
no Moscow, Minnesota.
Very good. Very nice play on words there, Nikita. I like it.
Those early days in the salt mines in Minnesota, northern Minnesota. Anyway, it's been an interesting trip for me, journey for me. It really has to. Never in 1,000, never in a million years would I fathom doing what I've been doing, the last 20 plus years since leaving wrestling. I left wrestling under my own terms, and just to clear the record, make sure people understand, no, Van Vader did not put me out of wrestling in my last match that I actually just celebrated November 7th. And my 25th anniversary, right? Silver anniversary. Hard to believe, but
very hard to believe. That's aging us both, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah, well, it's okay, but I mean, and I was the only people who can do the math. I was only 33 when I left. But under my own decision. I walked away under my own terms, and part of that was a goal as a child, actually, as a kid growing up. It's just it always bugged me that athletes would hang around too long. I'm like, why can't these guys walk away on top? Why do they have to wait till some of them are, honestly washed up, and then they're forced out of the sport? I'm like, when I make it, I am leaving on top of the business, period. And I told the guys when I broke in, I honestly did. 2 weeks, Don and I even discussed it and said, hey, by the time I'm 35, I'll be retired from active wrestling. I'm not saying I'll walk away from wrestling entirely, but I'll walk away from active wrestling. Oh, no, get your blood. I'm like, I'm just telling you. So I did get injured in my last match. I injured my neck, and I got a hernia picking up that 500-pound behemoth, right? And I did have hernia surgery, and I was rehabilitating my neck, and it was right at this time over Thanksgiving and Christmas that I said, you know what? I'm going to be turning 34. My goal was to leave by the time I'm 35 anyway. What point is it to go back for 9 months or maybe a year? I'm done. I'm done. So I walked away, and so now it turns 1993. I made the decision right at the turn of the year from 92, the end of 92, beginning of 1993. And now, 1993, I've got a health club, and I'm running the club, and I'm like, I don't know if this is what I want to do the rest of my life either. You know, what's life hold for Nikita Koloff in the future? And it was during that year, as I'm kind of pondering that, you know, reflecting on the past, looking towards the future through business contacts. You know, I've always, you know, diversified myself into different investments and business opportunities. And I was invited to a church service. I didn't grow up in church in Minnesota. I grew up, you know, believing in God. I just, you know, didn't know God. I believed in Him, just didn't know Him. And through a series of contacts and invitation, October 17th, 1993, I showed up at a church service in Concord, North Carolina, by invitation from a business partner, and it was there that I found, really honestly, what was missing in my life, because up to that point, I'm like, man, I've achieved this kind of quote fame and worldwide notoriety and climbed the ladder of success in this business, and yet why am I not, you know, why am I not totally happy? Why does there feel like there's something missing? And I found that what was missing in my life, and that was a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, that I made the decision that day, again, under my own terms, to walk the aisle and surrender, bow my knee to the Lord, and had an encounter that forever changed the course of my life and the course of my destiny. And so on that decision, Stu, wow, I never would have dreamed that I would have traveled now to 28 different countries, that wrestling many times would be a platform to draw crowds in and share the transformation of my life into a believer in Jesus Christ. And now, having ministered and evangelized, preached to audiences as little as one to the biggest audience to date was in Jamaica, where Lex Luger and I got to share together. We got to tag team and share our stories to over 73,000 people. So it's been incredible. The journey's been incredible.
It sounds like it's such a rewarding life. And, you know, it's funny. I had a chance to visit with Jimmy Garvin several months ago, and he had mentioned the same thing about he knew exactly when he wanted to walk away, and that's exactly what happened. And he's had a successful life after wrestling, and it sounds like you've got that same success. You knew what you wanted to get out of wrestling. You knew when you wanted to walk away, and now you're changing lives and everything. Let me ask you, thinking back, what is the biggest take or biggest lesson that you carry forward with yourself from your time in the ring?
Really, you know, the interesting thing, I kind of joke sometimes. I'm like, you know, God has a sense of humor, because for this reason, I didn't grow up dreaming of being a wrestler, right? Like many did. You know, I know many stories. Don, you know, so many stories. Don, you know, so many others, right? That grew up dreaming of being a wrestler. That wasn't my dream. My dream was professional football, and yet a door of opportunity opened up, and when it did, I walked through and took advantage of it. And the irony is, here's where God's sense of humor ties in. In high school, Pete Grigelko, the high school wrestling coach, tried to get me to go out for wrestling. And I'm like, you know, the idea, Stu, of two sweaty guys grabbing each other in their little underwear leotard thing in front of 12 family members just doesn't excite me. Give me a helmet, shoulder pads, let me knock somebody's head off, right?
Right.
What do I end up doing for a living, no less? Grabbing sweaty guys in my little leotard in front of a worldwide audience. No
yeah, I was going to say, is an audience bigger than 12? That's for sure.
Yeah, bigger than 12 family members. And so I tell people, I'm like, you know, God definitely has a plan for each and every one of our lives, whether we realize it or not. I had no idea wrestling would be a part of my life, but I look back on it now, and the biggest takeaway is I go, okay, what did I do in wrestling? Let's see. I flew on airplanes, rented cars, stayed in hotels, talked on microphones, in front of cameras, in front of all varieties of audiences. And let's see, since surrendering my life to the Lord, traveling around to 28 different countries. What am I doing now? Let's see. I'm flying on airplanes, renting cars, staying in hotels, talking to microphones, sometimes in front of cameras, for audiences of all sizes. So really, the wrestling was a setup by God Almighty. It was the training ground for the higher calling on my life, which was to become an evangelist, a minister of the gospel, and hopefully in sharing just a little part of my story, somebody's life has changed for eternity. And that's one of the most, you use the word rewarding, definitely rewarding, but it's incredibly humbling too, to think I get to have that opportunity. Wow.
I couldn't agree more. Nikita Koloff. You can follow him on Twitter at Nikita Koloff1. Nikita, it has been such an honor and such a privilege to get to hear your story and hear what you're doing to help people since you left the ring. Again, it's an honor to talk to you, my friend. All the best to you. I hope that one of these, hopefully we can cross paths again, and love to hear a couple stories, maybe over a bite to eat or a cup of coffee or something. But yes, all the best to you, my friend. All the travels to you.
Yes, sir. I'll take you up on that invitation. Yeah, and they can follow me on Twitter, same handle on Instagram, Nikita Koloff with the number 1 behind it on Instagram. If they want to hear even more of the story, they can go to NikitaKoloff.com or go on Amazon and get Nikita Tale of the Ring of Redemption and really get the full story from start to current day. And so I'm just honored that you would have me on, Stu. I appreciate the opportunity and the time, and hopefully my story will touch somebody's heart out there and impact somebody's life for the positive. Thank you so much.
Thank you.